contact is one of the least taught things or least understood parts about the game defensively, especially with long poles. But as a defender, I need to be able to cover the biggest guy. I need to be able to cover the fastest guy. I need to be able to cover the smallest, quickest guy. If an offensive player can get to your chest, that's advantage them. A lot of kids struggle because they lack understanding and perspective of what an offensive player is seeing as they're playing defense. How do I take away his greatest asset? Well, play in tight and play angles. And if I can train those angles and become very quick and efficient in those, well, now it's gone from a speed game to an angle game, which is advantage me.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of The Ride. I'm your host, Zach Quezada. Really appreciate those that have tuned in here early in 2025 as we've gotten the episodes back up and running. Big shout out to those of you that have supported the channel. If you can do so now, it'd be great if you could like or rate, share out the show to one of your friends. So today I sat down with Jack Posey, former All Big Ten second team selection for Penn State in 2023. He went undrafted in 2024 and actually was picked up by Andy Towers in the Chaos during the season, had a fantastic run with those guys, is planning to come back in 2025. He's under contract with the Chaos for that season. So really looking forward to watching him. Fantastic and authentic human being as well. I saw a lot of his content on Instagram. That's how I originally connected with him. He was really responsive and kind of looking through some of the drills. I think we both connected on that in this episode. You'll find that we spent a ton of time talking about the nuances of instruction and drill coordination and how you layer these things, and just getting into his mind as a real cover defenseman, right? A real cover corner, if you will, when it comes to those guys. I love talking to those guys because they have to strap up and oftentimes guard the hardest players in our game to guard. And so we kind of went into detail there, but also kind of how he looks at the game from a coach's perspective, how he layers practices. So hopefully you guys find some value in the episode and enjoy the ride. Jack, I appreciate you joining the ride. This is going to be a great talk. And those skill sessions instantly clicked for me because I'm interested to hear how you want to dive into this. But to me, lacrosse skill sessions, especially on the defensive side, are sorely lacking. To me, when I look at a lot of these, and I dove deep into the football training and defensive back work, they break this stuff down so granularly. And I feel like lacrosse, there's just not as much film, not as much content out there to really break these skills down, as opposed to just saying you're in your back pedal. Well, it's no, there's a lot of steps in there that aren't just a back pedal. And so super interested in your thoughts, because that's the reason I talk with you. I appreciate you answering my cold DM to be on the show, man. But yeah, happy to have you, dude. Let's dive in, man. You're working at the Lacrosse Barn down there in Texas. Tell me a little bit about that, because I feel like we'll start the pod there. Just talking about the Lacrosse Barn and what you just broke down. And
perfect. Yeah. So I'll run over what the Lacrosse Barn is real quick, and then we'll jump. I can talk technique all day. I can talk theory. I can talk just everything defense focused, because again, I think one of the biggest things is in the lacrosse community, we've seen an explosion of offensive skill development over the past, let's just call it 5 or 6 years. It kind of lines up with the PLL as well, but more eyes getting to the sport, better marketing, better branding, a lot more creativity being put on display. A lot more kids have been able to explore more. And there's also a lot of, to your point, offensive skill coaches like Coach Tintle, who are putting out just amazing content and really making the game more accessible at a higher level to a lot of kids around the country and around the world. But on the flip side, defensive training, most people think, oh, well, if I'm going to do defensive lacrosse training, I'm just going to approach a cone. And then to your point, then I'm just going to backpedal. I'm going to run through ladders, and then I'm going to pick up a ground ball. And it really goes much deeper than that. And I'm super passionate about it. But I'll go over what the Lacrosse Barn is right now, and
Sure.
then we can jump into all that. So yeah, the Lacrosse Barn down here in Dallas, Texas, it's the premier lacrosse training facility in the world. First of its kind. Is 80,000 square feet. Like I was saying a little bit earlier, it's about 80 yards long and 30 yards wide. It's actually big enough to fit a regulation size NLL box in here. And we actually have a regulation size NLL box. So not only are we looking to continue to develop the lacrosse community down here on the field side, but we're also looking to explore and bring the box game down to Dallas as well. But So what is the Lacrosse Barn? At the Lacrosse Barn, we offer a bunch of different services. Primarily, we are a skills training facility. So Nick Tintle, he has been in the skills coaching world for the past, I think, 15 years. And he has done offensive skills, working on shooting, dodging, really working on the efficiency and the nuance of, fluid movements, and not only making kids faster, more explosive and stronger, but also teaching them how to cut efficiently and safely, and really elevating players' games and giving them the tools and the self-awareness to improve towards their goals. And it's been an honor for me to come down here. So I just graduated from Penn State, but now being, I'm about 6 months post-graduation. My full-time job is to be the defensive skills coordinator or defensive skills coach down here at the Lacrosse Barn. So I work with small groups anywhere between 1 to 8. And then I also do privates as well. But really what it is teaching kids a higher level or a deeper nuanced understanding of what it means to play defense, and to really give them strategies to not just be reactive on defense, but to dictate what an offensive player does. So I coach boys and girls defensive lacrosse skills down here. And the Lacrosse Barn also has, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, 2 other businesses in the facility as well. So we have a full gym called Oak Fit, and then a PT or physical therapist in-house as well, who runs a company called Control. So when you walk into the Lacrosse Barn, to your left, you have a phenomenal weight room and like some of the best coaches in the Dallas area with strength, speed, and conditioning. And then to your right, you have one of the best PTs in the area. And then when you walk straight out, there's this massive field with some of the best skills coaches in the world. So really, it's just a whole symbiotic environment that's just conducive to creating the best lacrosse players. And really, at the end of the day, it's helping the kids get to what their goals are.
Dude, honestly, again, I keep hearkening back to some of the videos that you have on your Instagram, which we'll have in the description. That facility looks awesome. The workouts you're doing look more advanced. Again, not that just approach and drop step stuff that we're about to dive into. But yeah, really, really fantastic stuff you're doing, which is why I wanted to have you on the show. I'm fascinated with the Dallas area, man. Like, Dallas is definitely one of those hotbeds, those non-traditional hotbeds, like the Atlantas and maybe out in Cali. There's probably some that I'm leaving off, of course. But your kind of interpretation of why Dallas is just so ready and hungry to be about lacrosse, right? Because you said you had like 500 to or 1,000 kids on a specific day or something like that, trying to get into the facilities and all that stuff. Why do you think Dallas has been able to develop in that way?
I think, obviously, Dallas is one of the biggest, like, most premier sports markets in the whole country for like youth sports and just sports fandom in general. So, football is king down here, and baseball is a close second. You're a Cowboys fan?
Yeah.
So I grew up in the DC area, so I'm a diehard Commanders fan.
Oh man, I'm in Virginia actually, so I got a lot of buddies in the I'm in the southeastern Virginia, like Norfolk area.
Yeah, very cool. I grew up a Commanders fan. Yeah, great win last night. They kicked it off the. If they had missed that, that would have been about the most like Washington sports like moments if they had missed that game-winning field goal. So I'll take it. That's the first, I think, second playoff win of my life, but the first one I remember. So kind of cool.
Yeah, man, 100%. So Dallas, I feel like the coaching obviously is important too. You guys have such a plethora of great coaching down there. We were just talking about some of the FCL guys. Like, these guys are all around the Dallas area and they're giving back.
Yeah, it's real cool. Like, so one of the other things that we offer here at the Lacrosse Barn is we offer space to rent, like field space to rent. And one of the cool things about our facility is a lot of the other indoor facilities, like there's multiple indoor facilities in the Dallas area, but a lot of them get booked out by other sports, primarily like soccer. Like, they'll rent years out in advance. So when a lacrosse team tries to rent indoor space and they go to some of these other facilities, one, even if they could find space, which is extremely difficult because it's almost impossible, you'd have to bring in your own goals. You have to bring in your own ball buckets. You have to bring in all your own gear. But the Lacrosse Barn is a lacrosse only training facility. So like, we have the goals out in the field. We have, I think, 300 to 400 like pearl balls in each bay. and it's like everything a trainer or coach or like club team could want to ask for. But you talk about the FCL guys like Matt Dunn. I think we have Coach Tintle played pro, and then I think the amount of pro players that were down here that are now full-time coaches or coach part-time but are still dedicated to giving back and teaching. Right now, I think we have maybe six pro, either current or former pro lacrosse players that operate and train out of this facility almost on a weekly basis, which is pretty phenomenal. Like, I'm from Virginia as well. I'm from the Northern Virginia area. And I mean, while there was pro players around there, and I mean, one of my great friends and probably my biggest mentor in the sport, Jack Rowlett, we grew up in the same area, but I was fortunate to have one person who I could go and ask questions to. And now to be down here and there's 6 pro guys who are in the area and willing to not only give back, but come in on a weekly basis and mentor kids and teach kids and really go into like the finer levels of nuance. It's that combined with the love for sport down here. I mean, Dallas Lacrosse is only going to continue to grow, and it's a blessing to be a part of that process, man.
I want to pick out one nugget that you just talked about with Jack Rowlett. What did you learn from Jack? What did he teach you, man? He's obviously one of the better defenders to ever come out of Virginia, let alone just the sport in general. But what did you learn from Jack?
Everything. So it's funny you talk about football. I grew up, I played every sport. I played football, I played basketball, I played soccer, I did taekwondo, I played baseball, I picked up lacrosse in 4th grade. But essentially, I was a pure athlete. And when I picked up the lacrosse stick, a big thing was I was a very physical football player. I played linebacker. I liked to hit. And that was really kind of my gateway into the game of lacrosse, because not many people could match my physicality, which, took me pretty far. And it fortunately helped me get committed to Penn State. And when I got to Penn State, I was just kind of I was going to go all out. I was working hard, and I really just wanted to go out and like hit kids. And I was pretty good at covering the ball because I was athletic, but I didn't understand when I got beat, like why I got beat or how I got beat. And it was just kind of frustrating because I'd always been more athletic. And then while I was still very athletic or as athletic or even more athletic than some of the guys in college, I'd still find myself getting beat or in situations where I didn't feel confident or I didn't feel comfortable like on the field covering the ball. And then I started working really, I used to pay Jack for lessons, and now we're teammates on the Chaos, which is pretty cool. But I used to pay him like for a private lesson back when I was in like my sophomore, junior year of high school, and he was at UNC. And then essentially, long story short, when COVID hit, that was my freshman year. So I came back for freshman summer, and that was Jack's first year in PLL. And, we had nothing going on. So I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I'd love to pay you for lessons. Like, do you have any availability? He said one of the coolest things to me, and I don't remember word for word, but it was something along the lines of, look, man, you're in college now. I'm in the pros. I need a training partner. Like, if you're willing to work, let's find some times and let's go hit the field. And gosh, that summer and the subsequent summers, so my freshman summer, sophomore summer, and junior summer, we probably trained together, I want to say 3 to 5 times a week, just in the mornings, going over footwork. And man, like he changed my game, and he really changed my life.
Can you talk on that for the kids that are out there going to like prospect days and recruiting days that are so important? Don't get me wrong, but like how important were those training sessions, those actual like where you're just getting down to business, you're tweaking things, you're working on some stuff, as opposed to just traveling to every recruiting event imaginable?
I think playing is extremely important, right? The way I like to, and we can talk about kind of my training philosophy in a little bit as well. What I really came to realize working with Jack was you have to work your technique, and we can get into the specifics a little bit more, but you have to really like work and like walk through your technique and like jog through your technique, like before you even sprint through. Because a big thing I see a lot with defenders in lacrosse is there's this culture of like hard work, which is great. Like, obviously, yes, like you need to work hard, but every skill session or every session I go out and do footwork with Jack, some of them we wouldn't like even break a sweat, but I got so much better in those sessions than like the other ones where we'd roll a ladder out or we just do a bunch of like athletic development skills, which are also almost equally as important, because being a defender in lacrosse, I think it's a lot tougher than being an offensive player, just because an offensive player, you can have your skill set or have your body type or have your move, and that can be very effective. But as a defender, I need to be able to cover the biggest guy. I need to be able to cover the fastest guy. I need to be able to cover the smallest, quickest guy. So having like a very strong foundation of pure athleticism, being able to have the strength to cover the bigger, stronger, having the quickness and the agility to cover the smaller and quicker guys, and then being able to have that straight line speed to keep up with people in space. That's important too. But yeah, like to answer the question specifically with like going to all these prospect days and these camps, if you don't take the time to slow down and actually understand what you're doing or why you're doing certain things, one, you'll never like that. That's the area where we start to learn new perspective and start to develop our self-awareness as like, well, what am I actually doing, and how is the offense player actually perceiving me as a defender? And then two, in these skill sessions, we learn the technique, we learn the skill, and then immediately we put ourselves in positions where I'm going to make, let's just say, this approach the hardest it possibly could be, or I'm going to put myself in the most vulnerable position. And I think a lot of defensive training should be reactionary. You should have somebody you're marking or covering, so you have some kind of visual and like physical, body that you're moving along with,
which you're like bouncing off of, right? Because you're trying to make decisions in the moment. You need that other side of the force to bounce off of.
Correct. Yeah. So like we would go and do like very like technical, either like footwork patterns based off like what our approach would look like, what foot was forward, which I play in a way where I only approach with 1 foot forward every single time. And we can talk about that a little bit too, but that comes from Jack as well. But essentially, like, we go through very specific, like, okay, on this point of the field, like, this is what the footwork should look like. This is what the angle should look like. This is how the contact should be. And then we would then elevate that to a spot where, okay, now we're going to ramp the speed up. So if we were just going at about 25% of our, whatever, let's just say the speed that we could go at, now we're going to bump it up to 75, and we're going to essentially put ourselves under a stressful situation where we have to react and figure out or test the skills that we just implemented
in like live environment.
Correct. Yeah. But without also beating ourselves into the ground so much that we were hurting ourselves more than actually trying to get the technique. Because if you just go from, okay, we're going to learn technique to then going to 100%, well, if we jump up to this 100% level, like right away after learning a technique going, let's just say like through a walking pace, well, you're not going to be focusing on the technique. You're going to be focusing on surviving, because if you go at from basically, let's call it like 0 to 100, we're not thinking about the technique or the skill. We're thinking about, oh, this guy's running at me. And a lot of defenders have this anxiety about getting beat. And that's a big thing with the skills training too. It's like, it doesn't matter if you get beat. It's like right here, we're trying to stress test the skill and your ability to perform that skill. So we'd ramp it up strategically so we could intentionally work on the skills and focus on them under some kind of pressure or some kind of higher level intensity than just like walking through, but without kind of reaching or surpassing what I would call like a glass ceiling, where we break through that ability to like think through what the technique is, and then we're just breaking through and going straight to that survival mode of, oh shit, like, can I curse on this? Is
yeah,
that,
of course.
Fine?
Hell yeah.
Like oh shit, like I gotta stop him, because a lot of defenders I think go from that 0 to 100, especially on the field, where it's like, oh shit, like they're running at me, like what do I do now?
I love Jamie Monroe's concept of friction, right? Like he says, like ramp up the friction. If the drill's too easy, then ramp up the friction for either side. And so I think that's what you're getting at, right? Like you at first you introduce no friction, at least minimal, and then as you kind of go, it becomes more and more friction for the defender to kind of put himself in environments to test everything you tried under no friction.
Definitely.
Dude, I want your advice on this because, again, and I now we're here, you've already kind of laid this out. It's as to kind of how you layer your techniques. But one of the things I've done this past offseason was really an emphasis, like I said, on the footwork, specifically watching hundreds of hours, like a lot of hours of DB and linebacker work, although linebacker work I think you were a linebacker, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Doesn't transition as 1-to-1. It's more like slide technique for me, in my perspective. When I watch what linebackers do, it's much more about it looks akin to sliding in lacrosse, where DBs are a lot of times moving backwards and laterally, all that stuff. But I don't have the guys right now with sticks in their hands, and I feel like that's risky. But it also has the ability to like pay off more. You know, people are always like, you need to do it with sticks in your hand, and this is lacrosse. And to me, it goes back to what you were saying. It's like they're thinking about the stick at that point, and that while that's important, we're trying to nail down the footwork. And so when we're doing the DB work, it's very much hand placement without any sticks in their hands and all this type of stuff. So I wonder what you think, and then please jump into how you kind of like you got a raw player, or you know, maybe even talk about a more advanced player, how you work with those guys. But I just want to know how you coach, man.
Sure. Yeah. So going with, we'll start small in the specific question of sticks, no sticks, and then kind of build off from there. But everything that I have gone through and learned, and it's all been in tandem with Jack. And I think personally, my opinion, I think he's the best one-on-one defender in the world. I think he's been the best one-on-one defender in the world for the past, I think his rookie year in the PLL, he struggled with inside rolls a bunch. And that forced him to figure out how to play, I believe, what is the most optimal way of playing defense one-on-one. And he really developed that. And I was his dummy. I was his test dummy. So I was the guy dodging on him a bunch. But he also worked with other dudes too. But it was cool to be a part of that process. But again, I think he's by far the best one-on-one cover defenseman. And a lot of the stuff, almost everything I do, comes from the theory of what he taught me. But so to go to your point about like hand placement and hand punching, contact is one of the least taught things or least understood parts about the game defensively, especially with long poles. And I think like hand fighting is one of the greatest skills that a defensive player can have, especially a long pole. Let's just say I open up to if you're dodging to your right and I open up to my left, the ability, let's just say I'm a right-handed.
You're a righty
as well. Yes.
Okay, got it.
A big thing is this concept of like first and second layer contact. So like first layer contact would be my first, right? So it would be my top hand on my stick. So if I can punch with my top hand, now my body, my chest is still out in front of you. And this top hand, it might be enough to deter you from that dodge. But if you were to get past my top hand, if you accelerate or if the intensity of your dodge is, very high and you're trying to get to the goal, and then you get past my top hand, well, now I have second hand contact or the second layer of contact, which could be a bunch of different, there's a couple of different ways to go about it. But if they're going to my left, so they're right. If I make my top hand contact, they get past that. Well, now I have a couple different layers of defense. I could go just straight to a cross check and get you in the middle of my shaft. I could go with a chicken wing move, which I've posted that on my Instagram recently. And that's actually one of the things I've been trying to teach, which essentially is just keeping your chest in between the offensive player and the goal. But there's finer levels of nuance to that as well. And then like the third would be if someone gets past your top hand, then you could go V-hold, which is a little bit more traditional style of making contact to, covering someone attacking your butt end. But basically, to go back to the hand fighting point, what I'll do in training and what I learned from Jack is if I'm covering you and you pick right or left, I will drop step and I'll punch my backhand and I'll work on getting that backhand contact to be that initial primary contact. So I establish the boundary between me and the offensive player to dictate when they get to my chest, because if an offensive player can get to your chest, that's advantage them. Now it can be an advantage to us if we dictate when that happens, but to be able to create that separation or that barrier between us and the offensive player with that backhand single hand contact is very important. So I especially with my poles, I train without sticks as well. And I train first step reaction to, jab steps, split dodges, 3-step split dodges, skip splits over and over again, because, we're just diving right into it.
Hell yeah. That's what I wanted to learn, dude. Honestly, that hand placement and which hand you hit with, like these are all the things that I don't think are just taught for whatever reason, like I was even thinking about this, like why isn't there a lot of content for lacrosse on these subjects? And to me, like it's a smaller sport for sure than the NFL, but to me, it's like these guys make millions and millions and millions of dollars based on footwork, hand placement, coaching, all of that, and so that's why it comes out so strongly because they're like, fuck, I'm making $10 million off of teaching this guy how to properly shoot with his inside hand first so it doesn't close off his body and he reaches. Like that's the stuff that's never, for whatever reason, taught in lacrosse. It just comes off that way.
Nick Tinto owns and runs this place, and he's really been inspiring me to put more content out, which has been something I'm really excited for. And there's this year, especially as the high school season kicks up and a lot of the kids I train are going to school, I'm planning on going into more of a deeper dive in putting content out and really going through like the nuances and the specifics of the defensive skill itself. So yeah, that's on the way.
It's what's got you on this show. Like I saw your content, I was like, dude. And to be fair, you also responded to a comment on the Revo. Like I think I asked you a question about coming across to the chest.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that, but
yeah.
You were, dude. I love it. I love every second. Keep it going. But let's dive back in, man. I know I kind of made you jump the gun with the hand fighting question. So as far as like how you go into these traditional training practices, like or programs, how do you set it up? Like what are you teaching first, and then I would love to dive deep as we can, man.
The most important thing for me, whenever I start, and I know you mentioned whether it's like the most like raw athlete who hasn't ever picked up a stick or the highest level, most advanced kid who's going to go play for a top tier D1 team with dreams and aspirations to play pros or now Olympic level lacrosse. The first thing I always start with is I'll have a conversation with the athlete and asking them like what their actual goal is, so I can truly understand how I can get them to that point. I think that's a big thing too. And this isn't necessarily lacrosse specific, but I think it transcends lacrosse. And if a kid comes to me and they don't know what they want, well, it's going to be hard for me to ramp the intensity up to where it needs to be to help them, or to help guide them along the path of, along with helping you with your skill. Well, there's also getting to the goal. Like what's the purpose of us having the skill? Like what's the purpose of you acquiring this? Whether it's a kid who, he's going into his senior year and he's not going to play college, he's not going to play club, but he wants to be the best possible teammate and he wants to finish out his lacrosse career on the highest level possible to help his team in high school, versus somebody who has dreams and aspirations of playing at the Division I level. The first thing, it always starts with what's your goal? What do you want? And then through time, then the next question is, well, why? But essentially, when the session starts, the first thing we do is it's a warm up, but I sneak athletic development into it. I'm fortunate that growing up, I had one of the world's best speed coaches actually in like my backyard. His name was Justin Kavanaugh. He works with some of the fastest humans in the world. He works with gold medal Olympians, NFL All Pros, and it was a miracle that I lived so close to him and was able to receive this coaching. So I'll sneak different ways of working on, change of direction. And so, to go back to your point about DBs, I trained with DBs all the time. That was kind of like the gym I went to was mostly football players, and I was about the only lacrosse player. So I was training with the fastest kids in my area, learning the fastest ways to change direction, the best techniques, and a lot of like just the movement efficiency. So I'll do a warm up, but I'll sneak some of the stuff in and basically I'll call it athletic development. And then after that, what I like to do is I introduce a concept or a theory. So if we're starting with a brand new group, a lot of kids struggle because they lack understanding and perspective of what an offensive player is seeing as they're playing defense. So what I'll do with a kid or a group of kids who I've never worked with before is I'll start off and I'll make them play offense, and we'll go to certain points on the field where they typically cover. And I have a couple, I don't call them rules, I call them guidelines, where it's just something in this as simple as, if I'm covering you and we're going down the alley, right? I talk about this concept of like who's going to win the race to GLE, and it's nothing crazy. This isn't going to blow anybody's mind, but what essentially this concept is if I'm covering you and you're playing offense, and are you a righty or a lefty?
I'm a righty.
Okay, we're going down to your right alley. You're going to go shooting the run with your right hand. If I'm covering you and I beat you to GLE, or if I beat you downfield, what would you do every single time?
Roll back.
Yeah, exactly. But now here's the problem. How often do you see kids get rolled back on? And then if you want to ask them, like, oh, well, what happened? He's like, oh, he's just quicker than me. Oh, he's just faster than me. Oh, like, I don't know. Like, kids don't understand why they're getting beat. So what I'll do is I'll take them through this, and I'm like, okay, like, look. And a lot of coaches, they use the cue of, oh, be a half step behind. I think a half step behind's kind of the shit way to explain it, because it's really hard to measure what a half step is when you're going 100% and you're, sprinting as fast as you can. So I just keep it as like, okay, who's going to win? Like if we're going right now, like who's closer to GLE? It's like, we always just want to be like a little bit further. Like we don't want to ever be closer to GLE unless we're trying to manipulate and turn somebody back, which is a whole nother thing, because that's more like team strategy. Yeah, right. But it's like, okay, like let's understand and build the structure through gaining perspective that we can develop our self-awareness and understand why we're getting beat. And then through that, now we've created like a self-checklist, so I can go through each dodge or each time I cover somebody and be like, okay, well, and I'll go through like approaches as well. It's like, okay, how was my approach? Boom. Okay, well then how well did I match pace? And like, let's say they're going down the alley. Did I beat them downfield? If they bounced away, did I lunge? And then a big thing too is I'll go over angles and understanding like what we're actually trying to defend. Essentially, when I'm behind the cage, I like to think of, and I have some content about this, but I like to think of like the offensive player is trying to get as tight to the crease as possible to finish out in front of the cage. So they have like Jack called in when he taught me, he's like, there's the offensive line. And then let's say if this is the crease, right? And the offensive line is kind of going up here. It's almost like a route tree in lacrosse or in football. If someone goes like right up vertical, kind of like up the hash, they can shoot running up and away from the cage. Yeah, they can inside roll. They can question mark, right? They can rocker and get to the middle. So we need to have an angle that is steeper and will drive offensive players up and away. Essentially, we'll go behind the cage. And so real quick, my mind moves at like 1,000,000 miles an hour. And like, this is, if you ever need to, like, if you want to dive into something or you need to put the brakes on me, just let me know, because I could go in a bunch of different directions. But I like to teach through allowing the defensive player to play offense, allowing them to understand how much the defensive player actually dictates the offensive player's move, or what the offensive player's next move is. And then once they see how much like their body positioning affects the offensive player, it's like, okay, now we can start to drill out certain like specific techniques and shadowing drills and running through our angles. And
that's interesting, because you're kind of doing it, I don't want to say the opposite of what the way that I'm doing it, but a lot of the drills that we're in early in the season are very technique based. And I think it is important though that you show them how the field positioning works and how leverage works in totality. You know what I mean? Because then they can kind of use it in those drills.
To go back to like, how does the session look? Because we kind of got away from that for a little bit, but athletic development, then like I call it's almost like skill introduction or theory introduction. And then it's basically slow skill or slow pace going through the technique. Then it's the failure management. And then that's like where we start to ramp it up. And I usually like to finish with some kind of, if time allows, I like to finish with some kind of team oriented game. Just again, incorporate the stick, which is extremely important, but like teamwork, working together. Because again, working with youth, middle school and high school, understanding how to work in a team and that team dynamic is so important. And like, that's like the prime time to develop it. And then what I try to do is at the end, provide some after action review, going over and asking questions of what kids did well, what they think they needed to work on, just so through the process of training, they're also understanding how to self-analyze themselves and like figure out the little intricacies and specifics of oh, I covered, or this technique made a lot of sense, or I've struggled when I took this angle or like this approach, or I was too wide here. So the structure of what it looks like, again, athletic development, theory slash skill introduction, skill practice, which is that slow skill, then failure management, which is when we ramp it up, game, and then I like to finish with, what do you want to call it, an after action review.
Got it. And in review, and I heard you throw out the term self-analyze. These are super important things for players to understand, right? Because you have to have that ability to actually look at yourself, but also take feedback from coaches. It can't just be, I'm here to do the drills today. I go through the drills and I go home, and just a constant cycle. You're never going to be as good as you can be unless you self-analyze. How do you get guys to do that? This is like a lightning question, so keep the answer short so we can continue. But how do you? What's the most success you have of switching that light bulb on for a kid, saying you have to self-analyze? You can't just be out here. You have to think of the game critically.
Quick answer. It's just at the very end. It's simple and it's nice because we work in small groups. The most I'll work with is 8. I can go around to each kid and be like, all right, one good thing, one thing you need to work on. And that's just a way that they'll naturally start to like have to think about it. And then kid number 1 might be caught off guard. And then kid number 8 has all those people thinking, oh, like, well, what do I need to do? So really just introducing the concept to them and like making them answer the question and making them think. Most times when practice ends, kids go, thank you, coach. If they were raised right, and they say thank you. Not a shot at anybody, but just like, that's how my parents raised me. You say thanks, coach, and then you get out. But to end with what you do good and what do you need to get better at, it's going to force kids to critically think, and then in time, it's just something that they're going to habitually do because they've done it every single time.
Okay. I definitely want to, like, I know you felt like you were going too deep when you started introducing like the route stems and the route trees and all this stuff. Like, I want that. I actually really like that. So I want to tie this into what you were saying earlier, where it was like your first or second year at Penn State and you were getting beat all the time. Or not all the time, but you were getting beat more than you were used to in high school. So you had to learn differently. Like, what were those implementations, or what are these higher level things that I'd love to get on a recorded podcast, man? This is where I want to dive deep.
I think the first thing started with my approach. I think that's a very typical place to start, and that's the beginning of a one-on-one dodge. And essentially the theory of the approach is I approach my right foot forward every single time. Doesn't matter where I am on the field. That's where like that foot's going to be the one forward, because essentially if my right foot's forward, then I like covering guys going to their right hand. So I'm already in a drop step position, so it's a very smooth transition for me. Another thing too is offensive players, they're taught to break the top foot. So I kind of think, okay, well, if an offensive player is taught to break that foot, because they're going to attack my right foot, right, to try to open me up, then they're going to come back again. So I know either they're going to go in the way I want them to, or they'll attack it to come back.
Are you offset at all? Like, are you shading at all when you
Yeah.
put that right foot forward?
Yeah, so that depends on really where I am on the field. Again, if I'm above the cage, I'm going to shade to the inside or the middle shoulder. And then if I'm on the wing, again, I'll shade to the higher side shoulder to, again, take away top side. Or I don't say take away top side, but it's more like deter it.
I love
And
that.
put myself in a position where if the offensive player tries to go top side, they have to cross my whole body. So, and then back at X, it's a little different. Again, if we're closer, so like if we're within like the women's arc, let's call it, like the 12-meter arc, typically I'll approach the outside shoulder or straight up. And outside of that, I don't think there's a real need or reason to follow somebody out to the bottom corner of the field. That was probably a big one too. It's like when I started to understand what players were trying to accomplish when setting their dodges up, like let's say theoretically I was going to go cover somebody who's really fast, or like one quick move, straight line speed was their thing. Like example, Jack Trainer, phenomenal player, one of my teammates for 4 years. He was really good at that. Like he'd pull someone out to the deep corner, and I mean, he was lightning. He was faster than me. Like I couldn't beat him in a sprint. So something I had to realize was if he's better than me at that, but I have better angles and we can talk about understanding angles, how I got better at that in a second. It's like, well, why would I chase him out there? It's like I'm taking myself out to the deep water where I can't swim, or I'm not, it's like I'm a kid and I'm swimming up against Michael Phelps. Like, I'm just not going to keep up. So what I would do is I'd position myself back closer to GLE and further into the field, or further closer to the cage. So if he took top side, he still wouldn't be a threat. But if he attacked underneath, well, I was already where I needed to be. And essentially, I just took away his greatest strength, which was speed and space. By not following him and giving him a lot of space, well, he's going to have to make his move on me eventually. And then another thing too was getting comfortable with the concept of getting hung up. Because like in that sense, like it's easier to get hung up if you do that. Well, I think with the shot clock nowadays, and especially in the PLL, and I know you were curious about like my thoughts on the difference of PLL to college. Well, if you get hung up, I mean, for me in my game, I'm a physical player. I mean, the way I play is I'm going to force you to run through my chest, and there's no way I'm going to let anybody run through my chest. It's going to at least be a fight, or, massive contact. So getting hung up is great for me. And like, that's one of the things that I really started to understand is like, okay, again, if this guy wants to use speed against me, how do I take away his greatest asset? Well, play in tight and play angles. And if I can train those angles and become very quick and efficient in those, well, now it's gone from a speed game to an angle game, which is advantage me.
You made perfect sense. I mean, even as good an athlete you are, you understood that you could create an advantage using angles, especially against those guys that are faster. So that's exactly what I want to dive into. When you do go into this, and feel free to take it where you will, I do have a kind of personal or selfish thing that I would love for you to kind of expound on, is like moving laterally as opposed to moving, more of the kind of conservative drop step, or even I'm teaching that kick step now, which is kind of a 45 degree. I'm kind of interested on how you're looking at angles both on ball and taking away when you're kind of, the 5 to 10 yard gap that you have to kind of manage your leverage.
The most important angle, I think, and I think it's the hardest to develop, is we need to understand where we are in relation to the cage, and specifically in relationship to the near side pipe, wherever you are. Because if let's say I'm covering you back in the low corner behind the cage, right? All I need to do is know that if you try to beat me underneath and like kind of snake back up and try to like get to the front of the cage, really all I need to do is take the right angle that I can cut you off by the time you get to the crease. So, or like what I like to call is like, it's the angle to the near side pipe. And this is why it's a tough question, and why skills training is so important defensively. Because if let's say, would you say your game is more speed or strength? That's just simple as that.
I would say I was always more quick than I was fast. So I was like I was a quick dude who had some strength, I would say.
Cool. Okay. Hard to cover. Get a step, hard to move you off of it, right? Well, if I'm covering you and you're quick and you're strong, but let's just say you don't have the straight line speed, well, my approach is going to be different than if I'm covering Ross Scott, who has that straight line speed and the quickness, right? I might not play him as far out, because essentially, again, I'm racing you to that line between me and the cage. Because if you want to get to the goal, and you want to get underneath again, and if this is the crease, GLE, and this is X, we're way out here. If I'm right here and the second person's right there, if I run this line to the near side pipe, if this person wants to come underneath, they're going to have to cross that line. Mm-hmm. So essentially I need to have the field spatial awareness and the self-awareness to know where I am in relationship to the goal, 1. And 2, I need to know that I can win that race at the furthest possible distance, so I can approach you out as far as possible without knowing that I'm going to give that up, which is why, again, the failure management and the stress testing of the technique is so important, because I can cover someone who's slower and I can cover someone who's faster. My angle is going to change, or my approach is going to change. And I guess it's tough too, because that angle, it always changes based off of if you take one step backwards or if you take one step sideways, where you are in relationship to the cage just changed, which is very difficult to understand. And you talk about like football and linebacker, like why doesn't it translate as much? Well, a lot of the football players, which this was my problem too, being a linebacker, you're taught set a hike, you're downhill. You don't take a fall step. Just go, like, get downhill fast. And the problem is all you need to do is find the ball. And while you have to take a good angle, it's all out in front of you. Now, when you're playing defense and the goal is behind you, because your back's always to the goal, we need to rep this out over and over and over and over and over again, just so monotonously that you always know where you are on the field and you always know where you are in relationship to that near side pipe, which is kind of like the same concept. And what I tell a lot of the kids I work with, Coach Tintle, and then we have also Austin Early, who I think he's one of the best offensive, I think he's one of the best offensive skills coaches in the world. And then two, I think he has one of the best Instagram pages of pure content and drills for people to go and learn from. But what I'll tell the kids who come in, it's like, if you peek around the curtain and you look at the next little bay and you watch Coach Tintle or Coach Early and their sessions, like how many times is a kid practicing his split dodge in that session? Just guess. Kid goes like, I don't know, like 40, 50 times. I'm like, okay, cool. Like they're pretty good, right? Yeah, they're pretty good. So then it's like, well, how often have you covered a split dodge? They go, well, in practice. I'm like, okay, well, how often do you cover that in practice? Go, maybe 5 to 10 times. I'm like, okay, so you're practicing, and the kid on the other side of the curtain, he also goes to practice, so he's getting those 5 to 10 times, and he comes in once or twice a week, and he's getting 50 to 100 extra reps, and you wonder why you still get your ankles broke. It's like, well, you just don't cover it as much, or they're beating you on your angles. Well, you gotta think they're working this over and over again, and defensively, it's like that. Like that's really what defensive training is to me. It's like offensive players. It's very simple. Like what is offensive training? I work on my dodges. I work on shooting, and then I work on maybe there's some team concepts. You work on feeding and finishing, right? Okay. Well, defensively, how often are you running your angles? How often are you being tested on your angles? How often are you covering, a split dodge and simple drills that work on, not biting on multiple like combinations or jukes or all that kind of stuff. A little bit of a tangent right there, but again, it's like to go back to the point of like the angle and these certain steps in these certain areas. Like it's like how often are you actually putting yourself in that position? And if you're not doing it 50 per, like for me, it was always you have to do 50% more of what everyone else is doing if you want to get to where you want to go. Yeah. And a lot of these kids, they just kind of show up, and if they're athletic and it works, then great. And if someone's a little bit more athletic or more skilled, then it's like, oh, sorry, me. But it's like you can take ownership of that. And there's a little rant. Sorry.
No, dude, I love it. It's interesting when you bring up this like defense versus offensive training concept too, because it like my mind goes to those videos of like Lyle and Miles, and sometimes they would just like play by themselves. They wouldn't even play together. But offensively, you can do that a lot easier, right? Like you just imagine the defensive guy, you're like doing a rocker, you're trying to score. Defensively, I know some guys that do it, but it's a lot different to be like, all right, you're defense now. Go play against a shadow. You know what I mean? It's just, it doesn't lend itself to that type of play that much. You need another person sometimes, like Jack Rowlett.
There is a little bit more of a barrier to it because you do need to react off somebody. Now, one of the ways, and I think this will be good for your viewers and just anybody who's looking to improve. I mean, the amount of times that I have navigated the back of the cage and essentially the concept of running the rail, like I'll start in the back and then just work on my drop step. And it's like a push step or a kick step where I'm going to step back and then push off the foot that like, so if I'm dropping with my left, I'm pushing off my right. And I'll do that like maybe 20 to 40 times total. So 10 to 20 times each side. And then I'll go on the other, like I'll go on one side of the cage and I'll just navigate, jogging through, going back and forth. Because that's another thing with the back of the cage. I think if you can master that spot, that's a pretty good place as a long pole because that's the only spot in the field where there's an obstacle that isn't another man that's there to that offensive players use to try to trip you up, right? And I don't think anybody should get beat from X. I think they're the angle of the crease. If you're concerned about stepping on the back of the cage, that just means you haven't spent enough time navigating over and then changing direction over the back. And that's that I strongly believe that the back of the cage, I think it is becoming more obsolete where you see Dodgers. And I think Dodgers are moving more towards the high wings. But yeah, I think the best, most efficient defenders, and that just comes from, you don't even need someone to react to. Now it helps, but man, I've probably gone over the back of the cage, I don't know, 20 to maybe 30,000 times in my life. Like every session I do it at least like 20 to 30 times. And I'll be by myself doing it too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll clarify here. You were 10,000 times better than me as a player. But when I watch so many reps of lacrosse, and I do it just because I coach and I train, and I do this podcast, to me, it's like a lot of the mistakes that I see behind the cage are because guys don't know how to decelerate. Yeah. If that makes sense. Yeah. Like that's where I feel like I see. I don't know if you have the same thought on that.
Yeah. So going over the back of the cage, to your point, they're running and then they get really jumpy. And it's like, well, again, one of the benefits of playing back at X is we can chop our feet and like not slow our feet down, but slow our momentum down. So you're still prepared to change direction or reaccelerate, but you have to now the difference is if someone's going full speed and like there's no way they're changing direction, they're just trying to turn the corner. Well then like you can just sprint right back through. But again, if someone's like kind of going say 70%, 80%, and like they're just looking to like hesitate or do something, like if you chop your feet, keep them moving, but like slow like your physical momentum down, you're giving yourself the opportunity to not only change direction efficiently and get out, but reaccelerate through the other side of the crease to then meet the other player at your defensive line. And then another thing, I don't know what your opinion is on this, but I think turning people back is like, I think it should go obsolete. I mean, there are times when it's good for sure, but I think the majority, if you're playing like one-on-one defense and you don't have a slide and it's like iso ball me versus you, I'm gonna send you up and away every single time.
To answer your question, I've seen it taught way less than that. I think you're right. It will eventually, other than those slim cases, it will be obsolete from a coaching perspective, and then to the player, obviously. So real quick, we don't have too much more time. What we could do is break this into like part twos. Like I would love to have you back, man, and talk on like your whole journey with the chaos this year. Like that could be a podcast in of itself. Real quick, that way we can fit this into this episode.
Sure.
You obviously were with the chaos this year. You were at Penn State, two fantastic coaches there, Andy Towers and Jeff Tambroni. What did you learn from both of those coaches? Oof. I know that's a very heady question to end the show with, but
yeah, man, I think so. Both of them, I think, are they're more similar than you would think, but their tact is very different, and the way they go of delivering is what makes them very, very different. I think the most important thing is both of them, in the sense of leadership, they always put the team first, always upfront and honest. And they were just like real leaders of men. I think with Coach Tambroni, I always go back to this, but one of the things that I really learned from him was like, just like the truth piece, like what are some like the truths of life. And when I was getting recruited by him, he made me one promise, and that when I got to Penn State, he promised me playing time. He promised me that I was going to be a captain by my senior year. Or now I was fortunate enough to wear the number 11 at Penn State, which it is an honorary number. And he didn't promise me that was going to happen. Honestly, that was a shock. I wasn't expecting it. Like going into school. But he didn't promise me any jobs. He didn't promise me the only thing he promised me was the opportunity to work hard. And at first I appreciated it because it was real and it was honest, and he wasn't, feeding me a lie or saying that I was the greatest thing in the world, because I knew I wasn't the best, but I wanted to be the best. And I knew to get to that point, I had to work. But then I'd go on some other recruiting trips, and some of the coaches were offering me like, oh, freshman year, you'll be on man down. And by your sophomore year, you'll be a starter at close. And although I wanted that to be true, I wanted to play, I wanted to get time and all that kind of stuff. It was like, oh, you don't know that. Like, you don't know if I'm going to pan out. Like, I don't know. Like, hope God willing, I stay healthy and that works. When Coach Tamburoni promised me that, he's like, he basically said, I don't know what's going to happen. We think you can be great, but the only thing I can promise you is that when you come to Penn State, you're going to work hard. That to me was one of the most real things I had heard. I was 17 years old at that point. I committed there as a junior going into my senior year. And I was like, okay, like this guy knows something, or he at least goes about life differently than everybody else. And yeah, I'll work with somebody who gives me that opportunity any day of the week.
It builds an element of trust. It feels like where he's not over promising. Yeah. What you went there when Mac and Grant were there?
Yeah, my freshman year, I was teammates with both Grant Amen and Mac O'Keefe, and then Mac came back for a fifth year. So my first 2 years, he Coach Tamburoni promised me the opportunity to work, and I didn't play, so I covered O'Keefe on the scout team for 2 years in a row, which was
probably
awesome.
helped. Probably helped. What made them great?
Ooh, Mac and I would race down to the field every day. We'd come out of film, and then it was like who can get their pads on quicker, and like we literally like raced to get out the door because Panzer Stadium was about 0.3 of a mile away. We measured it out about 0.3 of a mile away from the locker room, so we'd have to run basically through our parking lot, cross the street, downhill, and onto the field. And him and I would race down. I'd try to go do footwork, and then he would be the first guy on shooting every day, and then he'd essentially be the last guy off shooting. And like most guys, when you think of like the hard work mentality, a lot of guys are very like, oh, like, I'm going to work hard. Like Max he loved it. He didn't like go about like this super bravado way of saying like, oh, I'm going to outwork everybody, but he just silently did it. And a lot of guys, I mean, I respected the hell out of him for it. And like, it was funny because we'd race down. If I beat him down and he saw me there, like he'd point at me and then he would just kind of laugh about it. And it was kind of the same way if he beat me down. I was like, oh man, like I'm gonna get you tomorrow. But he's so pure in his love for the game. And I mean, there's a reason why he's the greatest shooter of all time. He just does it more than anybody. And then Grant, it was funny. I have a little story with him. We had a foosball table in our locker room when I was a freshman. He was a fifth year, and essentially it was in the fall, so like we didn't have any games coming up. And I asked him, I was like, oh, I'll try to get to know Grant a little bit more. I was like, Grant, it's just me and him in the locker room. I'm like, oh, let's play a game of foosball. And he was like, no, it's like a Tuesday or a Wednesday or something. He's like, nah, I don't have time. I have to go watch film. And I was like, dang, like I'm just trying to get to know you. But then I'm sitting there thinking, I mean, there's a reason why this guy's a Tewaaraton finalist. Like, he takes his preparation so much more serious. Like, there's a reason why he knows where skip lanes are going to be. He's watching film on it all the time. Just so in short, the way they dedicated themselves to their game and the way they went about it authentically to them, no one worked more than them. And I mean, that was the model for me. But then for Coach Towers too, I know I wanted to touch on this and what he taught me in my rookie year. I mean, first off, he changed my life. I didn't get drafted, and he picked me up as a free agent. And for him to give me the opportunity that he did to earn my way onto the team, I mean, right off the bat, right before camp started, I barely played my fifth year. I was coming off an ACL injury, and he was like, look, we know at your best, like you can dominate in this league, and we believe you can get to that point now. But again, it was like, it's kind of similar with Coach Tamburoni. He's like, we're going to give you the opportunity. You go out and earn it. Like, there's a spot for you on this team, and there's a spot to contribute. And I played in 5 of 12 games, and each week he was upfront and honest about like everything. And from the very beginning, he's like, my policy is honesty, and I've never met somebody who stayed more true to that. So yeah, being a man of his word was something that I truly admired about Coach Towers.
I love this, man. Great conversation. The last thing I want to get out of the way is like, what's one thing or a couple things that you're looking to improve on for this upcoming season? You're with the Chaos again. You got a contract in 2025. So what's something to look forward to from you in 2025?
Something to look forward to from me in 2025. I think I just scratched the surface of what I was capable of this past summer. I played in 6 games. My final career, or actually, by the time I played my first game, I was about 12 and a half months out of ACL surgery. So having a year of actually being able to not only get back to the athlete that I was, but to be able to continue to elevate on. And I'm in better shape right now than I have been in my entire life. I'm stronger, I'm faster, I'm more explosive, and my skill is just so much more refined. So I'm looking to come back, God willing, a better player than I've ever been able to put out on that field and demonstrate for others. So I'm blessed and fortunate that I have the health that I do and that I've been able to recover the way I have. So yeah, I'm looking to come back a completely new, not a new player, but a completely elevated player in all aspects of my game. So I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to watching you, man. This is a great conversation. We have to do a part 2 though. I've been following you on Instagram. I will continue to do so. Again, I feel like we scratched the surface on the technique stuff and all that, but providing a lot of value to folks that are listening to this. Jack, appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Zach.